From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome to the Potomac Watch podcast. I'm Paul Gigot, editor of the Wall Street Journal editorial pages, and today we've got a special edition with one of my colleagues and a PW regular, Kim Strassel. Kim has written a new book, The Biden Malaise, How America Bounces Back from Joe Biden's Dismal Repeat of the Jimmy Carter years. The book is out this week, and Kim is here to talk about her book and what it tells us about the state of American politics in the 2024 election. So, Kim, welcome. Good to
Hi, Paul.
have you here.
So nice to be here in person with you in studio.
Yeah, and we're going to put you on the spot. So first of all, why the Jimmy Carter analogy? I'll just premise that question by saying I remember the 70s.
Me too.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
okay, I didn't really remember them. All right. But I was in them.
Yeah, but let's just say you weren't writing editorials at the time. I was. I remember the decade. It was a lousy decade, one of the worst of the 20th century, maybe the worst other than the 30s for economic policy.
Right.
But why the Carter analogy for Joe Biden?
Well, because on the face of it, it really is striking how many parallels there are, whether you're talking about how they came to office or you're talking about inflation or energy prices, border policy. Carter and Biden have both had these influx of people coming to American shores. In Carter's case, it was the Mariel boat lift out of Cuba. And obviously, we have problems at the southern border now. Foreign policy fiascos, again, energy, all these different things, crime across the country. But the one thing I'm trying to make the case for in the book is that this is actually profoundly unfair to Jimmy Carter. Because as you would know, having been there in the 70s, Carter inherited a lot of the problems he got. Now, he made them infinitely worse. But, we were already in the great inflation in the 1970s. It was already quite high. We already had an energy problem in this country because we'd gone through a global oil shock and we didn't have the domestic industry. And my argument is that why Joe Biden deserves a lot more criticism for these repeat of policies. He actually had to actively work hard to get us to this situation by overspending, by climate policies that have really taken aim at our energy sector. So that's kind of one of the main theses of the book. There are comparisons, but the contrast is that Biden deserves a lot more criticism.
Yeah, I want to tease out some of these differences between Carter and Biden because I think they relate to where we are today. Carter ran for president in 76 on sunsetting federal regulations. He ran on a fiscal restraint. He ran on some kinds of deregulation. And he swept in, remember, from Georgia. He was not in favor of the Democratic Washington establishment. He, in the election itself in 1976, he got 30% of self-identified conservative voters, if you can believe that.
I know.
Very, very different era. But when he came in, he brought in Ham Jordan as his chief of staff, Burt Lance from Georgia, the Georgia Mafia, they were called, as his budget director. And the Democrats weren't happy with that agenda. And immediately they went to chop him down to size. And there were a couple of symbolic budget fights. Carter griped about some water projects, threatened to veto. The House basically handed him his lunch by undermining an energy bill that he wanted. And he had to accept half of the water projects. And then they went after Burt Lance, and they ran him out of town on using the familiar ethics thing. And, of course, Lance was later exonerated. But my point is that Carter tried at least to govern from the middle, whereas if you contrast it with Biden, he didn't.
No, absolutely. And there was a very famous Carter friend who once pointed out that Carter hated spending money. And she rightfully said he was tight as a bark on the tree. And he hated spending money. I think a couple of things were working against him at that time. One is that the reigning view among the intelligentsia in Washington was nonetheless that the cure for unemployment was stimulus, right? More money, Keynesian going out the door. And that was just accepted wisdom. We did have the beginnings of Milton Friedman making his mark on the world, but a lot of people were just like, this is how you fix this situation. So he felt in the beginning, he came in, he did a stimulus. I think he felt that he was actually doing something that would be helpful. That combined with a very lax money policy over his first couple of Fed chiefs, nonetheless combined to make inflation a lot worse. But he did push back, not just on different spending, but also regulation. Look, he was the classic Democratic regulator, in that he believes the federal government exists to do environmental policy and safety policy, and that should be. And that's been a longstanding view of Democrats. Where Carter and a lot of his party are very different than today's party is they actually thought corporate America did good in the country. They liked it when corporate America made jobs. And they did things like there were still entire sectors of the economy. And you remember this, Paul, like airlines, which were essentially run out of Washington. They set the schedules, and Carter actually made it one of his jobs to deregulate some of these last big. He brought in Alfred Kahn, who was the godfather of deregulation in airlines. They did it to the trucking sector, to railroads, even some beginnings of oil and gas deregulation. Right. So he was much more in the middle. Biden is wholly a creature of the progressive left.
Hard to believe, but one of the leaders in the Congress for deregulation at the time was Ted Kennedy.
Yeah.
He led trucking deregulation and airline deregulation, railroads. And of course, that deregulation was very significant in the coming years in helping bring more efficiency and economic growth. The Biden contrast, I think, to that is notable because when Biden ran, he ran as a centrist. But we know as soon as he won the nomination, he set up a working group, his campaign, future White House staff, with Bernie Sanders designees. And they sat down and they put together this common agenda, which became the Biden agenda, which essentially was, I would call it 3/4 Bernie and 1/4 old Joe. And that became the regulatory agenda that has rolled out steadily. There's no deregulation anywhere in the Biden agenda. And of course, the huge spending bill in March of 2021, which contributed so much to the inflation we have. So is that a fundamental difference, not just between the way Biden governs, but between the Democratic Party then and now?
Oh, absolutely. Because you pointed out that Carter got a lot of pushback from more liberal members of Congress, but he also had a lot of people who backed him in some of this stuff as well, too, when he was there. Right now, Joe Biden, like I said, is completely captured to a party that is overwhelmingly on the left these days. And, I would just go more over it, whereas we had Carter deregulate certain industries, one striking contrast is the degree to which the Biden administration, from the start, and it was deliberate, it was a strategy, have put into place, in particular in regulatory positions in Washington, these almost crazy radicals in areas of what I call super regulators. They have the ability to put out rules that affect every single industry in the country, whether it's Lena Khan at the Federal Trade Commission or Gary Gensler at the Securities and Exchange Commission. These are folks that want to use their massive authority to kind of crush, as it were, businesses in sweeping rules that apply to every, especially public business in the nation.
So a question about Biden's choice here, because Biden won the nomination running against Bernie Sanders, and he won the nomination running against Elizabeth Warren. And the party rallied around him in South Carolina when they thought that if they didn't, Bernie was going to run away with the nomination. And so Biden actually won on a more or less centrist agenda. He said, I'm not for universal health care, government health care. I'm not for getting rid of all student debt. And there was at least a bow to more centrist democratic economics. So having said that and done that in the campaign, why did he feel obliged then to move to the left in office? Was it simply he wanted to make sure that during the campaign, the Sanders people were enthusiastic backers of him, that he felt he couldn't alienate the left? He had to buy the left's support. And then once in office, he couldn't get anything done if he alienated the left in Congress.
So I actually agree with you on the first part of that, which is that he did look at how narrowly he won in the end. And we also know from the turnout numbers and that was in large part because there were a lot of enthusiasm on the Democratic side and they managed to come out and get him in office.
But how much of that was anti-Trump?
That is true. I actually think that Donald Trump did far more for Joe Biden's candidacy than Bernie Sanders did in the end. I don't agree with the second one. He might have worried that he was going to alienate these people, but also this is just Joe Biden. If you look at the entire scope of his career, this is not a guy who's had like a Joe Biden philosophy. What's Joe Biden's philosophy? He's essentially been a vessel for wherever his party is at the moment. And it just so happens that the momentum in the Democratic Party is on the progressive left. They make up the majority of those in the House and the Senate. I actually think it's been damaging, though, to the party, Paul. One of the reasons that Republicans are in charge right now in the House is because the policies that Joe Biden has pursued really hurt a lot of those centrist Democrats that needed to be reelected, and they couldn't because they couldn't carry the baggage of the progressive wing.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have more with Kim Strassel. Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot, and we're here with Kim Strassel. Kim has written a new book, The Biden Malaise, How America Bounces Back from Joe Biden's Dismal Repeat of the Jimmy Carter years. One of the differences as we approach another election between Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden is that Carter had a challenge from Ted Kennedy ultimately for the nomination from the left, and it certainly weakened Carter, not as much as Carter's own policies did in the end, or the consequences of those policies, but certainly weakened him. He had the challenge from the left in the primaries, significant challenge. Biden has no such challenge. I mean, he's got RFK Jr. and
another
Marianne
candidate.
Williamson, another candidate, but they're fringe candidates right now. The left is basically on board. Biden's new run. Bernie Sanders says he's going to do whatever he can for it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is fully on board. So in that sense, Biden's strategy of governing to the left, keeping his party united, even at the cost of dividing the country, may be paying off.
Yeah, long memories. If you listen to Democrats, they still remember Ted Kennedy and what happened to Jimmy Carter. And it's become a kind of belief out there that there is no good that would come from a primary challenge. And that's certainly why you see, I mean, look, Gavin Newsom is sitting there just rubbing his hands, waiting. If there's any inclination that Joe Biden isn't going to see it through, they're going to have other people get in.
Yeah, do you think it'd take 24 hours or 24 minutes before he
24 seconds. But, you know, right now looking good on the party for that discipline, because I agree that I think that if there was a challenge, it would, even if Biden prevailed. But I don't know if he'd prevail. That's the thing that I think is different.
Is Biden going to run again?
Well, he says he's running again.
I know.
With 5 whole people and
on the staff, which is quite striking.
Yeah.
He's not exactly staffing up.
No. And the thing that I don't understand is he really not made his mind up yet? Or is it simply that this president, is this a commentary on his mental and physical state at the moment? Is he simply not capable of running a campaign of that caliber? Are they waiting until they have to? All
right. I'd say myself that I think there's still a significant chance. I wouldn't put it above 50%, but I think there's a significant chance that he does decide not to run in the end. Certainly there are an awful lot of Democrats who won't say this publicly, but they're anxious, very anxious about his age and how he's showing it, and his approval ratings, which are, 43% or so, and worse approval ratings on the economy, as well as some of the ethical issues that are piling up, and they don't know where exactly those might go, the Hunter business dealings and how they might reflect on Joe Biden. But let's talk about the other, kind of the back half of your book, which is how Republicans can take advantage of what you call the Biden malaise. And you focus, obviously, rightly on leadership. Republicans in 1980 had a leader emerge in Ronald Reagan who could unite conservatives, rally the country behind certain ideas, reform ideas. And you say in your book that Republicans need a leader of someone like that to do the same thing. But there's one difference, a big difference that I see between the 1970s and now on the Republican side. And that is, in the 70s, there was real excitement about ideas in the Republican Party. There's real energy. Bill Steiger, the Steiger capital gains tax cut in 1978, cut the rate from 35 to 28, became a kind of harbinger of Kemp-Roth, Jack Kemp's supply side ideas, which Reagan later adopted. It was a remedy to tackle inflation and tackle growth. Right now on the economy, I don't see any common Republican agenda. They're divided. There's a focus on cultural issues. They're united against woke progressives. But there's an awful lot of difference of opinion, not only in the Republican Party these days, on economics and increasingly on foreign policy.
Yeah, I agree. Just one little bit of pushback. When Reagan came in, obviously the other choice were Rockefeller Republicans, and he had to make his case. There were divides in the Republican Party back then, too. I think that what really helped Reagan was, as you said, the energy was on that side. And there'd certainly been a lot of evidence that Rockefeller Republican ideas were not the recipe for fixing the country. We're seeing cracks right now as well, too, as you said. Look, there's an entire populist wing of the Republican Party that thinks the way that you win is to out-Democrat the Democrats on the subsidies you give to people. You know, we're going to give them to families for having more children rather than to their electric vehicles. I mean, it's the same thing, different policy preferences. Notable, we just saw that forum that happened in Iowa. I mean, really a strong strain coming through of the need to get out of Ukraine and the argument that we can't walk and chew gum at the same time and that we need to put every bit of effort into domestic things. Never mind.
It's Bernie Sanders' argument.
Yeah, it's Bernie Sanders. Never mind, by the way, too, that, you know, the more disorder there is on the globe, the more we will be sucked into that and leaving us less time to actually focus on domestic issues. My argument in this is that nonetheless, like the formula that has worked in the past is the Reagan formula, peace through strength, the leave us alone coalition, smaller government, not an embrace that, you know, I'm here from the federal government and I'm here to help you. No.
Kim, I'm just I mean, I agree with you entirely that fusion agenda has worked in the past. Yeah. It's like to work again. Three-legged stool, cultural conservatism, and different forms and different issues than now. Economics, growth agenda, again, different emphases now than then. And then foreign policy, peace through strength. But there are people in the party, significant people, who say that's brain-dead Reaganism. Mm-hmm. That is libertarian fundamentalism has taken over the GOP. I think it's nonsense. I'd like to know where the libertarian fundamentalism is in Washington. You know, you can put them in what we used to call a phone booth. But there is nonetheless significant differences about that strategy.
Well, I mean, I guess I would argue in response to those who call this brain dead zombie Reaganism. You know, we already have a party in Washington that wants to get reelected by giving you handouts and telling you how you can live your life and moralizing about the car you drive and family values, et cetera. If you really want to try to compete with Democrats on that front, go ahead and see how well you match up, because they're the real thing, baby. And you are just going to be a shadow of that. So I'm not saying anyone's going to listen to me, Paul, but I was just trying to make the best case for why that isn't really the way forward. And it's certainly not a formula for electoral success.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, a candidate will emerge. And I take your point that in the 1980, you had George H.W. Bush call Reagan economic policy voodoo economics. And of course, Reagan triumphed and then passed it, and it was a great success. But some candidate will emerge this year. We don't know who it will be. But of course, Donald Trump is the big boulder in the campaign right now. He's got over 50% support. Nobody else has been able to break through. And I guess, is he the leader of the Republicans that you say the Republicans need?
Look, first of all, here's the thing that I kind of find amusing is that Donald Trump, much more so in this reelection campaign, is presenting himself more as a populist, even more so than the last time around. You know, the last time around, there were some discrete issues, immigration, trade, for instance, where he tapped into Republican dissatisfaction with policy as it had been. To the extent that Donald Trump had a successful term in terms of the economy, it was because he entirely implemented Reagan policies. He cut regulations, he cut taxes, et cetera. It wasn't those other things that he talked about.
Donald Trump first term.
You know, it wasn't his immigration policy that got him the economy he got. You know, it wasn't his trade policy that got him the economy that he had in the end. So I find it odd that he doesn't even recognize himself.
It's tax reform and deregulation.
Yes, exactly. Those made such a huge difference. So there's that. But here's my bigger point in the book, too, is that Reagan didn't just win because he had good policy ideas, though he did. He was an optimist. He showed incredible belief in the future of the country. It was such a contrast to the doom and gloom of the time and the malaise of the time. People wanted that in a leader. He knew how to smile. He knew how to tell a joke. And Republican primary people will make their choices. But my argument is, if you think Donald Trump is the great communicator, I think that that's not necessarily the case. And while they're all out there with a lot of choices, that has to be something that's on people's minds, is if you want to capture hearts and minds, bring them back into the party on an optimistic vision, you got to ask yourself if Donald Trump is the guy who can do that.
Well, his message is obviously more grievance, personal, often, from all the things the Democrats did to him. So much of it unfair and frankly false.
Yes. Yes.
But in that sense, he's running, I think what did he call? I am your retribution. That was a line he has used. And retribution politics as a campaign theme is not typically a winner.
Yeah.
I mean, anger does drive a lot of votes, and there's no question there's a huge chunk of the Republican electorate which is very loyal to Donald Trump, sees him as their champion. The question is, can you win with that message in the swing districts and areas that you need in this country to be able to put together a majority? I'm talking about the suburbs of Milwaukee, the suburbs of Phoenix, the suburbs of Atlanta, the suburbs of Philly, the suburbs of Detroit. And, that's a real question. I'm not sure. I think he will have a very hard time winning, even against Joe Biden, unless Joe Biden has a notable decline, even below physically and mentally where he is now, or if there's a serious recession.
Yeah, I agree, because people also have had their experience now with this, and they well know what will be coming again, but on steroids. By the way, I don't think it's impossible for a candidate to do two things at once, to actually call out the abuses and the breaking of norms and standards on the Democratic side and the FBI problems, et cetera, right, and say, by the way, that's why you need to elect me, because we got to move past that. We cannot continue having this as the way it works.
I'm going to be smart enough to overcome all that.
All that, right. Join in me, and we will get us back to where we were. I think you can do both of those.
So are you saying that the Republican primary race is not over yet? Because it's interesting. Democrats and the media on the one hand and Donald Trump on the other agree on one thing. There are two things. Number one, they want Donald Trump as the nominee. And two, they think it's already over.
I don't think it's over. Look, I think Donald Trump does retain that 35% of voters that he had last time around that you consistently saw in the primaries and the caucuses where they showed up, they were his guy. Might even be a little bit higher just because of some of the brushback, I think, or the help he's getting from the fact that people right now feel he's been attacked by Alvin Bragg, et cetera. But that still leaves a good portion of the party. My question for the rest of this Republican field is, when are they going to get smart enough to stop chasing all those voters that are never going to vote for anyone other than Donald Trump and start going after everybody else?
Kim Strassel, author of the Biden Malaise new book, How America Bounces Back from Joe Biden's Dismal Repeat of the Jimmy Carter years. Kim Strassel, of course, author of the Friday Potomac Watch column in the Journal, frequent contributor to the Potomac Watch podcast, and editorial board member of the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for coming in, Kim. Good to see you.
Thank you, Paul.
We'll see you after your book tour.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.